Julian of Norwich must by definition have spent a long time in isolation, many decades worth, as an anchoress in the city of Norwich, attached to St. Julian's Church. She lived in one room for most of her life, bricked in, locked in, given the funeral rite by the bishop. She did meet people through windows, but she was on her own in that little space. How did she survive mentally? How did she stop herself from going stir-crazy? I guess the answer must be that she found a degree of peace in her soul. We see this implied in much of her writing in her book, that she had a great sense of peace and bliss and belonging and loving and being loved. Perhaps Julian had an insight into that universal truth which is at a deep level of spiritual understanding for all of us if we can get close towards it, if we can reach it or attain it. That sense that if we share in communion with God, then we must, by implication, be in connection with all things. There is no sense of isolation if we are in God, if we are in the Creator, and God holds all things in the palm of his hand, as if everything that had ever been was simply the size of a hazelnut. All things in physical space and in the concept of time and history are just like the size of a hazelnut in the palm of God's hand. And so if we draw close to communion with him, we are reaffirming in our own minds and hearts and spirits that sense of interconnectedness with all things, that God, the Creator, can only be in everything. And if we are close to him, we are in him, and we are close to that everything. And so, spiritually speaking, we might say a sense of isolation is ultimately an illusion. We may have an absence of things coming to our senses, an absence of company around us that we can visibly see. But if we go into that spiritual place of contemplation, as Julian surely did in her decades as an anchoress, then we feel in tune with everything, in touch with everything, and connected with everything. She touches on that topic, I think, in the first part of chapter 65 in her book. The gracious presence of our Lord that abides, which presence residing in all things we should earnestly be mindful of, for it worketh marvellous secureness. The higher love of God awakens in us such a sense of oneness that when it is truly realised, in a sense, no one can part themselves from another. In other words, coming close to God, we have a sense that we are connected with all his creation and all his children, near and far, those who have gone before us, those who are yet to come, those who are miles away, even continents away. We are with them because we are all in God, and in the end, spiritually speaking, there is this great spiritual understanding. All is one. Spiritual writers do touch upon this grand topic from time to time. If you go forward from Julian and her time, about 250 years, you come to another spiritual Christian mystical writer who is not terribly well known, but I think his time will come, as Julian's has. His name is Thomas Traherne, and I think he touches rather beautifully and eloquently and poetically on this sense of all things being wrapped up together in God and God's love, and if we are close to God, we are close to all things. In part 54 of Thomas Traherne's First Centuries book. He writes this. He refers to God, but it can be a theme that embraces and includes all of us if we draw close to God. He that is in all and with all can never be desolate. All the joys and all the treasures, all the counsels and all the perfections, all the angels and all the saints of God are with him. All the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them are continually in his eye. The patriarchs, prophets and apostles are always before him. The councils and the fathers, the bishops and the scholars minister unto him. All temples are open before him. The melody of choirs reviveth him. The learning of all universities doth engage with him. The riches of all palaces delight him. The joys of Eden ravish him. The revelations of St. John transport him. The hosannas of the church dynamic and hallelujahs of the saints triumphant fill him. The splendour of all coronations gladden him. The joys of heaven surround him, and our Saviour's cross, like the centre of eternity, is in him. It taketh up his thoughts, and exerciseth all the powers of his soul, with wonder, admiration, joy, and thanksgiving. The omnipotence of God is his house, and eternity is his habitation. God created time and space. He is beyond them, and he holds them in his hand, the size of a hazelnut. If we go into that realm with God, we connect with all things. Everything in time and space is his, as are we.